So now we're on to our winners and spinners. Timo, your winner?
It's a strange time in the world. Sebastian Vettel, when he was at Red Bull, he was not my favorite person in the world, but a bit like, oh no, actually no, it's just Sebastian Vettel was the example I was going to use of Sebastian Vettel's there, so that doesn't work at all. But as soon as he left Red Bull, I thought, you know what, I don't mind this guy so much now. Lewis Hamilton as he move, and Vettel to Ferrari, I thought, okay, this could be interesting. And he's now kind of wormed away into everyone's hearts that he wasn't in before if he wasn't already there. And he loves Suzuka, he loves the fans. There was a great video on F1 socials of him getting a present from a Japanese fan. I don't know if you two saw that, but
is that the one of him getting a trophy and he goes, "Oh, it's the only trophy I'm getting this year" or something?
No, but that was also great. He got given this box of toy cars that this Japanese man had made himself, like little Hot Wheels, and it was in one of these kind of work boxes where there was like they all had their little compartment, but there was some spare around them. And Vettel jokingly said to the fans, like, "I'm going to have some more kids then, am I?" I was like, "Yeah, you could do it. I'll have to ask my wife about that first." But again, just he loves the place, and even said that if anyone ever wants me to come back for a one-off appearance, I'll do it here in Suzuka. I'll happily do that. And despite spinning off track in the first lap of the first corner, he then did absolutely brilliant on the strategy when the race finally got underway again and bossed it up into, what was it, sixth place in the end?
P19 to P6.
Yeah, and was able to fend off Alonso, who was on an absolute charge with another brilliant strategy. And yeah, so Sebastian Vettel is my main highlight there. But Alonso as well, first time in the points since Japan back in 2013, when he came fourth there with Ferrari. As we said before, Guan Yu Zhou, fastest lap of the race. Not that it counts for any points, but that's also just shows you how mental the conditions were. And because this is the only bit of good overtaking we got to see outside of the main two battles on screen, Russell for his smooth overtakes through the S's. It showed that, like you were saying, just you can overtake here if you are a bit ballsy with it. And it was also places that, okay, we said you could overtake. We didn't mean these places, but that is mighty cool.
Yeah, it's the Alice Powell going under the grandstands overtake from Singapore last weekend, and it was an absolute corker of an overtake, and he pulled it off twice. And you're thinking,
it just looked so easy. Like, why is no one else doing it there?
Yeah, it says a lot of these cars can race, and around Suzuka they can race. And had this been a dry race, it would have been absolute, or a drying race, it would have been absolutely fantastic. You then have cars on split strategies, and it would have been more bonkers than it was, but in a good way. But yeah, definitely, I can see why you've given
even more impressive with Vettel though, because Aston Martin, as we know, is not the best team at the moment, and the car is. I'm glad that it was just a procedural error for them in the cost gap, because if they had overspent, Jesus Christ, it wouldn't have helped them, would it?
Yeah, what did they spend it on? But yes,
they spent it on catering.
Probably, but that is not a P6 car, and achieving P6 with it is something quite special indeed. Ellie-May, your winner.
I've gone for Max Verstappen. Pretty dominant. Not sure.
In those conditions, to be half a minute ahead of your teammate or the next, we didn't see him for most of the race coverage. He just
and
driven
not just
off.
Because of the conditions.
Not because he just driven off, just gone off and done his own thing, half a minute away from anyone else on circuit. For me, that makes sense as a winner.
Yeah, it kind of harks back to it was last year. You know, when he was, I can't remember which race it was now, when he was just off into the distance, and he was like to his team, like, "Have you guys remembered to hydrate?" Like,
was it Silverstone last year? No, not last year. It was the year before, 2020. He asked if they'd washed it, if they'd used hand sanitizer, and if they're making sure they're drunk enough.
Yeah, because literally he was nowhere near anyone else in track. And to think, okay, last year 30-second gaps were pretty normal for Red Bull or Mercedes, but this year all the fighting has been pretty close. So for him to be 30 seconds up the road in the rain, with tyres everyone else was struggling on, people had to pit again just to manage, and he was just flying.
It's just amazing. And I also do have 2 shout outs as well. First one, Lance Stroll. because he had.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, she is feeling well. That is correct. It is one of those wacky weekends where Lance Stroll did something good.
It was a good start.
It was
I'm
a
not
good
disagreeing.
start.
That's the terrible part. I can't disagree with it.
It's another point where we're all agreeing.
He went steaming down the inside of everyone, and he got up 7 places up to 11th. At the start, in wet conditions, that's, I'd say, pretty great. My other one, because in all the chaos, everyone has forgotten, Latifi has got points.
Hugh Hulkenberg coming back and getting like a 5th place finish just to piss him off.
Yeah, demoting Latifi back down to 21st or something. Yeah, we're a bit, yeah. It's just one of those races. I'm still puzzling by that Lance Stroll start because it looks like it's almost a dry patch of circuit where it
does look dry.
Or something. So he just gets onto there and it just hooks up and goes.
There's a Fast and Furious edit where he just gets the blue flames, just goes for it.
Yeah, he's perhaps he just uses mushrooms early on in the race or something and just sort of gets little speed boost.
Yeah,
so can someone edit like Mario Kart style music over that section because it does look like he's going in fast forward.
He literally just pressed the NOS button and just zoomed forward. But I think it was it Jensen Button saying he would have had to have pre-planned that. He must have seen that was a dry part of the track and thought, you know what, that's a good place to go.
And let's go for it.
Which at the same time is uncharacteristic of Stroll because he's not usually that smart.
But he is good in the rain. Think Turkey 2020.
He's been waiting 2 years for this opportunity.
I mean, equally, it's one of those weird premeditated things, which we know that his teammate next year also likes, i.e. Alonso basically taking runoffs through turn 1 to find fast lines that he can get away with.
We're all worried about Alpine and the fireworks there. Never mind the Aston Martin just coming out and just taking everyone out because they're like, speed!
Both Alonso and Stroll finding shortcuts through turn 1 to basically leapfrog the entire pack.
This is Mario Kart. If we can find the shortcuts on the track, we'll be able to use them.
I would argue that having Cooper
clever.
come along and crane you off the circuit with his little cloud is probably safer than the mechanism we have in place at the moment.
Suzuka is the bit where this overlap just drops down to the bit of the track. Like, I'm ahead now. This is fine.
Yes, yeah, there is a slight gap in the fence where you can just sort of. And he's pulled it off again. No, he did it last year because...
Were we in Turkey last year?
Yeah.
I've forgotten that already.
It was it wasn't quite as exciting, but we were in Turkey last year and because Red Bull had their special livery there last year.
Yes, they did.
He says like I remember that.
Yeah, it replaced Japan.
And Esteban Ocon did the whole race on one set of tyres, slick intermediates. And again, there's just that little spark about him that makes him quite an exciting driver and one to try and follow. So, yeah, for pulling off an absolute worldie of a drive, holding off 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton in superior machinery, Timo's nodding. He's now found the Wikipedia entry.
Do you think he's, in some sense, the Carlos Sainz of now?
Yeah, he's coming to fruition after a period of being quite underrated. And yeah, I think as Alpine gets better, which it seems to be on a trajectory of doing and seems to be well within its sort of grounds of feasibility and attainability, if that car keeps getting better, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few podiums from him, either at the end of this season or definitely some next year. There'll be a lot more Esteban Ocon podiums, which I'm here for.
Yeah, it's weird because I have a weird relationship with Esteban Ocon in the sense that when when he
Get the doll out, Ellie-May.
When he first started F1, I was like, this guy's really good. And I was genuinely really, really sad when he left in 2018.
Yes.
Because I thought he really deserved a seat in F1. And then when he came back in 2020, yes, he I think maybe because he was against Daniel Ricciardo, he just seemed, it looked like he was a bit meh, but actually on paper he was a lot closer than we all realised. And now it's starting to sort of come to light that we have been sleeping on Esteban Ocon.
Yeah.
Which kind of...
You and your relationship with him, maybe.
Yeah. I was going to say that statement's now weird, but...
But yeah, he, especially when we've now had a chance to put him against a two-time world champion in equal machinery, and he every weekend qualifying hit and miss, but actually in the race, his ability to take it to Fernando Alonso and battle it out. Think back to Saudi Arabia last year. Think back to, he was pretty good in Saudi Arabia this year as well. He was quick. And last year he was on for a podium had he not been out-dragged by Bottas coming out of that last turn. That was just down to Bottas having a slightly better car. All race long, he had Bottas behind him. So, yeah, Esteban Ocon, underrated winner in my book. And he's kind of tall, lanky, and really quite funny and good-natured. I just like him. He's just a nice person. So we'll move on to spinners because no one else is going to announce it.
I was trying to think of a fun segue.
Timo, go with your spinner.
FIA, for reasons we've already gone on, and if anyone's interested, I'll be setting up a separate hotline and help service, which is just for everyone dealing with the FIA and their absolute arsery.
If you've been affected by any issues raised by the FIA, feel free to get in touch with us at the Undercut Podcast team at gmail.com.
But my other big spinner is the race TV directors, because what on earth were they on this weekend? I mean, honest to God. That is, I mean, I think we have a new Lance Stroll Monaco moment, really, because I get the overtake and the going off track with Charles and Checo was important and interesting, but we literally saw it. You showed us. You don't need to show us immediately afterwards. Wait 30 seconds for the other cars that we care about to finish, because there were only two other battles mainly happening on track that everyone gave any kind of shit
interesting
about. I was trying to think of whether there wasn't shit there, and I didn't. And instead, we don't get to see Ocon and Lewis battling over to the line, just to see maybe Kenny finally do it as they get around there, because he's getting closer and closer. No. And then the bit that annoys everyone the most, Alonso and Vettel, brilliant battle, 6 world championships between them, and combined age of a pensioner, and an age that Jesse is not far away from now. And just the smallest of margins going over the line, and we don't see it. And again, the overtakes we saw Russell do, we saw them on replays. We didn't see them live. And you think you've got the box on the side where you show some interesting stuff going on when you want to have two things going on at the same time. Why was that not happening?
We know they can split screen as well. They have the split screen functionality.
They can do it on the US and the German stuff so they can have adverts during a race. They do it during IndyCar. This is the one time where we don't mind it, and you don't do it either. So it was just, what a load of pish.
Well, they missed basically Alonso from the point that he pitted, making his way back up, the whole entire thing. And I remember watching Alonso at the side with the timings and him getting closer and closer to everyone, because he was like 11 seconds behind Russell, and I was like, oh, he's never going to make it. And then on the last lap, he had overtaken him and was catching Vettel at some speed. Yet, why am I watching the timings of it? Why am I not actually watching it?
Jesse, you reminded me of the Formula 3 race in Budapest when the two drivers stuck on the tyres, just the slicks just before, with like 7 laps to go, and they were making up like a ridiculous amount. It was, I can't remember who.
Was it Smollier and someone else coming through the pack?
No, not Smollier. I need to, I will go and look, because that's going to annoy me now.
Or listeners, you can go and listen back to that episode and
we haven't
find
released
out.
that episode yet.
No, we did.
It's in our F3 review.
It's in the big feeder series Hungary podcast. Our F3 triple header review will be coming out literally later this week, actually.
Yeah.
But
anyway, it was phenomenal.
Ellie-May, your spinner.
Just because Jesse, you haven't done yours yet, but I agreed with both of you that the main losers of this all was just the FIA and TV directors. So I thought I would actually do a team on track, McLaren.
How dare you?
I know. Gone for McLaren because Norris, he qualified 10th, moved down to about 13th, 14th at the start. of the race. Like, he had a really poor start.
9th to 13th because Yuki and him swapped places.
Okay. Ricciardo, on the other hand, moved his way up to 8th. They then, after the restart, were like, you know what, we'll pit Norris early, get the undercut on everyone else. That kind of worked because it meant that he finished 10th. But that's one singular point. If they had pitted Ricciardo when they pitted Norris, Ricciardo could have had a big haul of points, which would have helped them in the fight against Alpine. Instead, Ricciardo went from 8th down to 15th, ended up behind Lando, and finished 11th. So, okay, Alpine would have overtaken them in the constructors anyway, but it would have been a lesser amount because now Alpine have a 13-point lead. And it's just, what are you doing? Okay, I know you're favouring
Is that the
Norris.
title of this episode? What are you doing?
I think that's going to be Ferrari's season review.
Yeah. Okay, you're favouring Norris. I get that. But at the same time, I don't, because
It's a team sport at the end of the day, and you need to have both drivers in it if you're going to beat Alpine, and it's no use doing with the hand behind you. I almost wish they'd pitted him when they pitted Vettel, thinking that they could screw him over that way, and then he ends up in 5th and going, that didn't work out for you, did it? Look who's bringing home the bacon now.
Because Ricciardo could have ended up 5th, 6th. Instead, he's got no points because his own team decided to screw him over, which is just how I feel. What's
disappointing but not surprising.
Yeah. And that's why they
a
are
way
my
to summarise the
spinner.
2022 season. Disappointing but not surprising.
Yeah. Move on to my spinner quickly, and I don't think anyone else has made such a mess of this weekend as the FIA and the race directors. At a push, though, Haas, nowhere race for them. There was a lot of scope to pull something from it. Obviously, we saw Latifi picking up points. It's likely that they could have had a Magnussen or a Schumacher up there also picking up points. And as fun as their long gamble on that safety car was, weirdly enough, we didn't see any further safety cars after the race restarted. And seeing Mick briefly leading a race, which he did put on his socials, which was quite cute, it will have likely cost them a point or two, and especially when they're currently tied on points with AlphaTauri, there's not a lot of points around their end of the league anyway. It's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top, and they could have potentially thrown one away for a slightly flat sort of pit call there. So that's my one.
They wanted that safety car that never came. And just, again, screwed over Mick.
But he did lead a race for about 400 metres or so, which
not quite 400 metres.
Was the first time a Schumacher has led a race since Japan 2011. I do bring the fun facts to satisfy you all. I know. Thank you later.
That is a nice fact.
Talking of facts, one little bit we wanted to talk about briefly was wet conditions, the championship, and just wet racing generally, because we seem to be, not us, the fans, but we as a collective, if we include ourselves with the FIA and F1, which is dodgy, I know, but seem to be overly excited for them and then incredibly disappointed, and in the FIA's case, scared of them.
What is a wet race?
Oh, yes. We don't have wet tyres for starters, so we can't even properly race in them anyway. So who knows? But it just... A friend of the podcast, Jake Phillips, and I were having a conversation months ago about this, and thinking about, I think it was around Monaco time perhaps, and our F1 wet race is just overhyped. Are they actually any good? Because if we look at this year, for example, Suzuka, you could argue it was good, but when you look back on it, you're not going to remember it too much for the racing because you're going to be too annoyed at everything else. Monaco, for the same reasons, because you have a delay of an hour there, and then the race was all right, but again, could have been so much better if the cars were smaller, because you know it's Monaco and it's all essentially done on a Saturday anyway, so there wasn't much that happened there. And if we go back, 2020, Russian Grand Prix, wet race, interesting because of the beauty of Lando potentially winning his first race and then losing it to give Lewis his 100th Grand Prix, and equally heartwarming and heartbreaking in that respect. But aside from that, what actually happened in that race? Can anyone tell us? You have to think about it. Turkey, both years.
Somehow moved up.
Yeah, it was just kind of he was just doing an office meme and just like, Jesus, how is he there?
We had Albon and Russell fighting out at the back of the pack. We had, for some reason...
In Russia last year.
In Russia last year, wasn't it?
Albon?
No, not last year. The year before, wasn't it? Oh, yeah. You make a point.
Which
made a guest appearance.
Your point still stands then, in that case.
The 2 Turkish Grand Prix, I've only just remembered we even had it last year.
Last year's was quite flat, I'll admit.
2020, memorable
2020
because...
was good.
2020, it was all right, but again, outside of Stroll's pole position and Lewis's title victory, there is not much I can think of off the top of my head. I'm just going to run Bottas bowling, but that was again mixed conditions, not necessarily wet for the whole race. I'm going for full wet Grand Prix.
Pit engineers driving around before the race in hire cars to try and at least lay down some rubber and clean the circuit.
Actual Grand Prix racing, not things that happen near the Grand Prix.
Leclerc on the last lap,
throwing it away.
The last corner, threw it away. He threw third away, gave it to Vettel, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Vettel's only podium that year.
Which race are we at here?
Turkey 2020.
Turkey. I was still thinking Budapest. I don't remember that happening anyway. I don't know what you're on. Spa last year doesn't need anything saying to it. And again, you've got the kind of crazy race of Hockenheim 2019, I want to say.
Yep.
But again, is that a good race, or are we just happy with it because the result was so different, because you had so many cars crashing out? Is that what defines an interesting race? Because I would argue that the 30 minutes or so we got from Suzuka was a better race than that one, because we got to see close racing in very wet conditions, and it was on the edge, but not over it. Everyone was worried about we're going to go out and we're going to have a terrible time. We're going to be people crashing left, right, and centre. And we didn't have that on the race restart when we got there. It was still damp and you couldn't see anything, but you were able to have a good race out of it. Whereas Hockenheim was like, oh, it's a great race. But was it when you look at it? Because you took out a lot of people, and obviously you promote people up there. It's a matter of survival, which again, that's what happens with one. That's very well and good. But does that mean that it's actually better than a lot? Is that better than Bahrain this year? Is that better than Saudi of this year? Or isn't it? And you think about some of the genuinely good wet races in F1, but the only one I can think of off the top of my head for being generally good for complete wet is Canada 2011, for obvious reasons.
The race that brought in the maximum time limit to stop it being a 4-hour marathon.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I know that I look back at the past couple of years and think, we loved wet races because it leveled out the grid, and it doesn't really do that anymore. It hasn't recently. And I was having this conversation with my dad whilst waiting 2 hours for Japan to restart. And okay, in some places like Singapore, you can't predict the weather because the rain will just come out of nowhere. But Japan, they predicted that they were going to get heavy rain at some part in the race. Why don't you look at the weather forecast and think, you know what, guys, let's move the race to an earlier time. And then at least not like an hour before and everything's manic, but if you could see the forecast the day before, give the fans enough warning so that they can turn up on track earlier, and we'll have an earlier race. Because I would have rather have gotten up at 3 a.m. in the morning, saw a race for 2 hours, then get up at 6 o'clock and wait 2 hours for the race to start.
Or we make the race earlier still and just simply put it at a time that isn't the rainy season in Japan. Put it earlier on in the season when we're already over on that part of the globe. I don't know, after Australia at the beginning of the year.
No. We don't do
sensible?
that here. We don't do that here.
Too sensible? Sorry. But anyway, I think there's definitely argument for the fact that wet races, we have some interesting wet races. I liked Hockenheim 2019. It was a good race. It was a race of survival, and it was a race that was pushing a lot of the teams and drivers to their absolute limits. You saw how much Mercedes cracked under the pressure of it, which you don't see from modern day Mercedes. And we saw Vettel on the podium.
What constitutes for a good race, though, is do you need all these retirements and this survival nature to do it to make it a good race, or can you, because now that we have a Japan where you have this close racing where Mercedes still, if we're going to follow with that kind of trend, that can't get past a car they should be able to get past, it's still interesting and you don't need to be DNFing for it to be good.
I think this is something we should come back to at the end of the season as one of our off-season things and properly discuss, like sort of around a coffee table with a nice mug of coffee, what makes a good F1 race, because there are so many different elements to it. Timo will likely want to sit down with a glass of something malty and scotchy, and to be fair, I don't blame him for that, because it's one of those deep conversations that every person's going to have an individual appeal as to what makes a race good. And like you said, you don't much care for Hockenheim 2019. I quite liked it as a race. It was an interesting race.
I liked it. I just don't think it should be held up in such high regard as it should.
What do I like more, Canada 2011 over Hockenheim? That's a big call. Before we get completely sidetracked, we'll move on to Constructors Countdown, which this week I figured I might as well try and do live and then add the backing music to it afterwards. For those of you who don't know how the editing works, usually I just simply cut the tracks and splice myself doing the Constructors Countdown in after about 5 attempts. Timo, you look already concerned about this going ahead.
Just a point for when you're editing, turn the music down slightly so we can hear you.
Okay.
What if we do the tune, Timo?
Please don't do that. That'll be off.
I only have the Cantina band.
And we don't have license for that either. So, time for Constructors Countdown. Williams still tail the field in P10, AlphaTauri and Haas tie on points, but the US outfit leads the Italian one on countback. Aston Martin now tail P6's Alfa Romeo by just 7 points after the latter fails to score. P4 and 5 swap yet again as double points finish moves Alpine ahead of McLaren, 143 points lead 130. Mercedes sit in P3 scoring 1 point less than Ferrari in P2, but a dead set win that can be ratified in Austin is still held by Red Bull in P1. I think it did that in under 30 seconds.
We'll be counting.
But I don't know, you might have been, because the idea is it's done in 30 seconds. I was staring at the script. I didn't even blink for that.
I shot myself.
Thanks. Anyway, we'll move on, and it's now time for the Drivers' Countdown. Same challenge, but now with the drivers. Hulkenberg is now the only pointless driver on the grid in P22. De Vries ahead on 2 points in P21. Latifi sits in P20 with his newly found 2 points. There's no change for Albon, Zhou, Tsunoda, Schumacher, Stroll, Magnussen or Gasly, ranging from P19 to 13th. 12th and 11th see a swap of places for Sebastian Vettel, overtaking former teammate and fellow departing driver Danny Rick. Bottas, Alonso, Ocon, Norris, Hamilton, Sainz and Russell all retain their places from P10 through P4. Ahead, Perez now leads Leclerc by 1 point and confirmed as champion with an definitely untouchable lead of 113 points. Max Verstappen is the 2022 world champion.
Woo!
Oh, it's trying to rattle through the names so fast. That's the really tricky thing. Anyway,
would you like easier names?
No, that would be quite for a boring grid.
Say Nick de Vries's full name.
What is his full name?
Like Hendrik Johannes. Hendrik Johannes something de Vries.
The name in itself is 30 seconds long. I've got to get through 22 drivers.
The name is bigger than him.
Yeah, you could write it out on like a series of paper and it would be longer. Anyway, before we get on to talking about the fact that AlphaTauri now have the shortest driver lineup for 2023, that's how they're going to be quick. They've saved all their weight on driver. We'll go into our predictions review, and it is points galore this week, where 9 points have been handed out, making this the highest scoring week of the season so far, ahead of France and Belgium, which saw 8 handed out. It's a fun fact for anyone who really cares about this bit. Team and I scored both a point each, him for his pole position and myself for Perez coming second of all the predictions to have gotten right. Our guest from last week, Ellie Thompson, scored 3 points for pole, first place, and her wild prediction of Ferrari having issues. If by issues she means Charles Leclerc picking up a penalty and Carlos Sainz ending up in the wall due to aquaplaning. So that's a pretty big issue. But with a whopping 4 points for pole, first, second, and her wild prediction of Latifi not binning it, it's Ellie-May. She looks so happy.
It does mean she has to change her Latifi thing for next race, though, because it happened a lot sooner than anyone thought it would.
Yeah, this is true. And he scored points through not doing it. So the standings are as such. The guest still trails on 15 points. Timo is on the first step of the podium in third, having accumulated a staggering 17. I'm in second with 19 points. And Ellie-May is romping home with the phenomenal 23 points. She has a fantastic average of scoring 1.2 points every race.
I am the Mercedes to your Ferrari, Jess, and I'm fucking coming for you.
That's weirdly romantic. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
We'll move on from something just as pointless as our predictions to the Fantasy F1 review. And over in Fantasyland, it's proven to be a chaotic weekend. I've sort of been hampered by, of late, some of my good drivers getting expensive and losing their double point status. So I had Charles Leclerc and Perez in different teams as like your turbo driver. You can double them up because they're valued at less than 20 million. But because they've had good races, they've now been higher valued. And thus I can no longer have them as my turbo drivers. So that's not gone well for me. Anyway, the weekend's top 5 runs as thus. Alan G in first on 231 points. Jim K's Consult Your GP in P2. Alex H's Team 1 in P3, a crucial points haul in the championship. P4 belongs to my mate Dan, and my girlfriend Georgia bags P5 with her Does He Have a Moustache team. I meanwhile came 7th with Jaffa Cake Racing, tying on points with the podcast team and James Baldwin's Rememory, all on 151 points. My BRT Yamaha team comes home 10th, while Timo's On the Curbs comes a lowly 15th place. Despite having Leclerc, Alonso and Vettel, it's rigged, I tell you. Hang on, you've written that in there. The net result of all of this is that I'm no longer leading the standings. I'm down in P2 and P3. Alex H's Team 1 leads me by 23 points, so the fight for the title goes on.
That's ironic that
I
it's
don't know
23
what
points.
I have to do.
Yeah, it's ironic that it's 23 points, and honestly, Timo, I don't know what you have to do. Perhaps just do better.
Vettel, that was a gamble and a half, and he gets 6th place, and I get bugger for it. What is a man to do?
Well, who else did you have
Do
in there,
better.
though?
I had Norris on double points, which I admit was not as helpful as it could have been. Alonso, Leclerc, and Christ, who was the other one?
Vettel and then a constructor.
I had Mercedes as the constructor, but I had a 5th driver because there's only 4 I've named there. But I know that the 5th driver finished as Yuki. I had Yuki.
Outside the points wasn't being my team.
Yeah, but still, 3 in the top 10 plus a constructor. You would have thought they'd get you a bit more. I'm not expecting to win this thing, God knows that. But, get me above 15th place just for a race or two.
Perhaps
Give
it
the
is
man
just
a break.
rigged against you. Perhaps it is
It's
just
like-
rigged.
I think Ellie-May's in charge of it. That's what's going on here.
Wow. If it was, I am putting Does He Have a Mustache at the top.
I'm sure Georgia will be very thankful to hear that.
It's a great name.
It's a team comprised of drivers that have facial hair, basically.
It makes me think of Nigel Mansell, and that makes me happy.
Oh, well, there we go. If you want to make Ellie-May happy, just talk to her about Nigel Mansell. It's a perfect point to wrap up this week's podcast, Dom. We'll just come to you as a 2-parter. If you haven't listened to the first part yet, it is essentially what the hell has happened, and probably spans for about 3 times the length of this half of the podcast, where we talk
And the Grand Prix.
and the Grand Prix. If anything, I think we talked about it for longer than we saw actual cars racing over the weekend.
We did aim for that.
We did aim for that, albeit as a joke. But there we go. What is this podcast, if anything, but an oversized joke?
We are a joke.
If you have any questions for us, we are looking to do a Q&A episode after the season. So if you want to get in touch with us via the comments, feel free to do so. We try and respond to sort of immediate comments there and then. Equally, get in touch with us on the socials or by email if it's something really long. The email address is the one I read out earlier, actually. It's the Undercut Podcast team @gmail.com. Nice and easy. It'll also be in the description for the video wherever you're listening to this. So speaking of things that will be in the description, Timo, where can the people find you?
You can find me over on Is It Fast, where I've got a lovely interview out with Kevin Hansen later this week, which should be out by the time you listen to this podcast. I also got a brand new episode of On the Curves coming your way with an ELMS driver. And I'm also over on the Nitro RX podcast and Paddock Sorority. That's the last one. I have to remember everything I do there because I do way too much for far too little because I just love motorsport too darn much.
Did you mention Is It Fast?
Yeah, that was where the interview with Kevin Hansen's coming out.
Oh, just checking. Didn't want you to skip anything off your very busy schedule.
Cheers, bro.
That's right. Got to back my boys here. Ellie-May, where can the people find you?
You can find me on our Instagram page where I write my key takeaways and I run our TikTok account. And I've been doing neither of those. So...
But it's still in the script, so it's okay.
It's still in the script, so it counts.
Maybe I'll get you something from the TikTok account from this episode. We'll wait and see. Maybe the bit at the very beginning of the part one where I mentioned about thinking, no, I won't do that. If you want to find more of me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as @JesseOnCars. And if you like print media, you can find me in Classic Car Weekly. I'm trying to think what I've got coming out in this week.
More shit.
No, big lead news story this week. If you want to find out what the Labour government is potentially planning for your classic car, bad news, it's not good.
I hate to tell you, we don't have a Labour government.
No, but if there is a general election...
The podcast's been long, but it's not been that long.
I haven't checked BBC News. But if you want to find out what the Labour government could be projecting for your classic car, that's this week's lead news story. So,
does it come in red?
No, it comes in a little box when it gets scrapped and crushed. That's the plan. Labour government wants to scrap your classic cars. Spoilers. Yeah. Anyway, so if you want to find out all things classic car, go pick up Classic Car Weekly with me in it. Thank you very much for listening to hopefully both parts of our review of the Japanese Grand Prix. According to my phone, we've been recording for 2 hours and 14 minutes at this point. So it is appreciated that you've gotten to at least this point. If you haven't, shame on you. And we'll see you in our preview for the American Grand Prix in about a week's time. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.